With time dwindling out on the campaign trail, the Harris and Trump campaigns are now deploying new tactics to win over voters. Fox News correspondent Doug Luzader joins us now from Washington with the very latest.
We'll see the Trump campaign this week reaching out to women voters as the Harris campaign completely changes its strategy with the media.
We are nearing the home stretch, but here's the thing. This is going to be a tight race until the very end.
Vice President Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania making a point everyone seems to agree with. This is going to be very close.
Hey, better late than never, right?
Harris's senior spokesman came on Fox yesterday to talk about the campaign's latest move, having Harris sit down for an interview tomorrow with Fox's Bret Baier. It's a huge shift for a campaign that for weeks had been very risk-averse with the media.
They've realized that hiding the candidate, particularly one not so very well known as she is, isn't working.
You've been eaten alive with inflation, and all I'm doing is getting you back to even.
On the other side, former President Trump has been hitting on the economy, but he too will be more targeted in his media approach, agreeing to a Fox town hall tomorrow with women voters, a group that generally favors Harris. And for the vice president, tomorrow's interview is all about reaching out to voters well beyond her base.
She's going to reach voters where they are, and she's reaching a different set of voters than some of her podcasts and other interviews were reaching, and it's smart of them to go after every vote.
Now, Harris has been doing more interviews recently. Her sit-down with Fox tomorrow will go for 30 minutes. In Washington, Doug Luzader, Fox News.
Doug, thank you so much for that update. 7 o'clock here on the East Coast and giving you a live look there at our election countdown. 20 days, 17 hours, and 59 minutes. Joining us live this morning to further discuss the very latest on the state of the race, none other than political analyst and historian Rich Rubino. Rich, good morning to you. Always a pleasure having you here with us on Live Now.
Yes, good morning to you as well.
So, Rich, to say the least, it's been a very interesting election season. President Joe Biden dropping out of the race, then the Democratic support going behind VP Harris. Across the aisle, former President Trump, it seems like he's been the front runner the entire time. Set us up, please. How did we get to this point where we are now just 3 weeks out until Election Day?
Well, it was supposed to be Joe Biden was the incumbent president. And usually incumbent presidents run for a second term. As a matter of fact, Lyndon Johnson in 1968 was the last Democrat, or last president, that is, who did not seek a second term. And he, of course, had finished part of Kennedy's term, and then he was eligible to run for his own term in he won in 1964. He could have run in 68. He did not. So it's very abnormal for an incumbent president not to seek re-election. He earlier in the race did seek re-election, and then he went into one debate. And that one debate, he performed very poorly. After the debate, there was growing pressure for him to drop out of the race. He reluctantly did drop out of the race. And there was really because Joe Biden had racked up primary wins, his only major challenge being Dean Phillips, a congressman from Minnesota. It turned out that he basically gave his support, and the Democratic Party high command gave their support to Vice President Harris, who is next in line. There was some anger by folks like Joe Manchin and the centrist wing of the Democratic Party that thought that there should have been some sort of a primary, and the 14 million people who voted for Joe Biden should have been able to have their nominee as the nominee of the party. But basically, you have a scenario where Vice President Harris becomes the presidential nominee without a major primary. That's how it used to be back in the days when conventions controlled the convention controlled who would be the nominee, not necessarily primaries. So we're kind of going back to the future, if you will. On the Republican side, you had a litany of other candidates, from Governor Doug Burgum of North Dakota to Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, to Nikki Haley from South Carolina. And at the end of the day, the party went back to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is trying to be the only president, the first president since Grover Cleveland to win two non-consecutive terms. Grover Cleveland won in 1884, lost in 1888, came back and won in 1892. So that's basically what he's trying to do. Now we're about 3 weeks into the 3 weeks before the election, and you've had some really kind of interesting alliances. One of them is that there are many Republicans, Liz Cheney being one of them, the former congresswoman from Wyoming and chairman of the Republican of the Republican conference in the House of Representatives is endorsing Vice President Harris. And contrary-wise, you have former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii is endorsing Donald Trump and basically trying to make the argument that Donald Trump is the candidate who's against regime change wars. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And I think that really the polls are so razor close right now. It really, I don't know how anybody would be able to make any sort of a prediction what's going to happen in Election Day.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because this election season, we've seen legislators, those names that are household names, cross party lines to support those who they feel are the best to be the next commander in chief. I want to ask you, Rich, as we are looking at those swing states, those undecided voters, you mentioned that this race at this time is pretty much neck and neck. It's so close as we continue to look at these polls that are coming out pretty much on a weekly basis. What will it take for either side to come out on top on Election Day?
It's just a matter of out campaigning the other side. And I think it's a matter of getting your voters out. It's really two things. On the one hand, you have to bring out as many low propensity voters who are on your side as you possibly can. And that's why you see a lot of the political advertisements are geared toward those voters. But you also have to bring in some of the voters in the center, some of those really elusive swing voters in swing states, in swing counties, places like where Vice President Harris was yesterday in Erie County, Pennsylvania, a county that has been extremely close in the last couple of elections. So that's really what it is. It's a matter of bringing your base out, and the base should be galvanized. And then it's also a matter of bringing out low propensity voters who potentially are on your side, but aren't necessarily enthused by the political process, if you will. And then it's really a matter of bringing out those very elusive swing voters.
Rich, I'm sure it's no surprise, but we've seen the one and done debate that happened with VP Harris and former President Trump. But we got to hear from Trump a little bit more, because we saw his debate with current President Joe Biden. Unfortunately, though, at this time with either side, there are still many voters who don't know who they want to choose simply because they don't really understand each candidate's policy. As you know, when the questions are asked, they say the response they want to, and sometimes not a direct response to the question. We know that recent endorsement from border control for former President Trump could be on his side, as one of the many hot topics this election season is immigration and the border.
Yes, and it's interesting. Donald Trump has also managed to get it so that the International Brotherhood of Firefighters and the Teamsters Union, both who've endorsed Joe Biden last time around, have not endorsed Vice President Harris this time around. Part of it is that Donald Trump is trying to make himself out to be a different type of a Republican, not kind of a laissez-faire libertarian that just wants less government. He's trying to make it out like he's more of a populist, and populists tend to appeal to labor unions tend to appeal to the more populist candidate. So he's done that. The Border Patrol agents certainly have endorsed him. I don't think that's really necessarily a surprise. They're generally a very conservative coterie. But certainly he's been able to kind of take the wind out of Vice President Harris's sails when it comes to union endorsements. And Vice President Harris, on the other side, has been able to take out the wind out of Donald Trump's sails by having many members of the Trump administration, former members of the administration and members of the military, come out and endorse her.
Rich, if we look across the aisle, we know VP Harris and honestly the Biden team, also former President Barack Obama, they have been campaigning hard specifically for that black vote and the women vote. And I can tell you it's kind of been a double-edged sword for her, because you have those who are like, look, she looks like me, she can relate to me, I'm going to vote for her. But then on the other side, you have Black American voters who are saying, you know what, don't generalize me into this small space, just because I'm Black, it doesn't mean, one, I'm Democrat, and it doesn't mean I'm going to vote for her. I've even heard from some Black American small business owners who have said the Biden administration didn't really help them out these past 4 years. Can you contextualize that, please?
Well, it's interesting. So the black vote was originally very Republican. If you go back to the days of Abraham Lincoln, you go up to the days of James G. Blaine, the days of Benjamin Harrison. Gradually, really beginning in the New Deal, it started to gravitate toward the Democratic Party. When Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, you saw really a kind of transmogrification where the Democrats became almost monolithically the party of the African American vote. Barry Goldwater at the time, the Republican presidential nominee who had voted against the Civil Rights Act in the United States Senate, said you have to go where the ducks are. So Republicans tried to instead appeal to white Southerners who are traditionally conservative Democrats. And since then, the Democrats, it's been really their greatest voting bloc. Joe Biden won about 90% of the African American vote last time. Obviously, the Democrats are going to win a majority of the African American vote. But if Donald Trump can peel off 5, 6, 7%, that could be theoretically enough to give the election, and assuming that is that they're in those 7 showdown states, to Donald Trump. But it's a constituency that's been very monolithically Democrat basically since 1964, but it's becoming a little bit more independent.
Rich, depending on who you ask, they will say the Republican shift this election season happened when Nikki Haley dropped out of the race, because if you remember when she was running, she said even if she doesn't win the commander-in-chief spot, that she would never vote for former President Trump. But then you see her speaking for him and advocating for him at the RNC. There is a lot of concern this morning about him garnering that women's vote and being able to relate to women Americans and also Black Americans, because as you know, there was a lot of controversy surrounding him stating that illegal immigrants were taking, quote, Black jobs.
Right. And he is trying to kind of peel off a little bit some slivers of the African American vote. And by polls show that he's doing a little bit better than traditionally Republicans do. I do think, though, that on the other hand, and you heard this Barack Obama when he was campaigning, he basically says that, he knows that there is some sort of there's a little bit of peeling off specifically of Black men. And he was saying maybe they don't necessarily want a female president, but I think that they're trying to do everything they possibly can to try to get that Black vote up to potentially 87, 88, maybe even 89 or 90%, where it normally is for a traditional Democratic presidential candidate.
Well, Rich, it is the final stretch, and let's say that the Trump team and the Harris team, they're watching right now. They want to hear from you. What will it take for either of them to come out on top and win the most votes on Election Day? As you can imagine, former President Trump is really holding strong to election interference this election season. He's holding strong to the concerns of mail-in ballots. So as these concerns are on the table this Tuesday morning, what would you share with either side if they're like, hey, we need some last-minute advice from Rich Rubino? What do we need to do to be the next commander-in-chief?
It's really a delicate balance, because on the one hand, you really have to do everything you possibly can to make sure your base comes out. And I will say, in the terms of the Democrats, they have I think it's a problem. It really hasn't been, it's been kind of underreported, but Vice President Harris has a problem in the Arab American community, specifically in Michigan. If you go back to Joe Biden when he ran in the primary in Michigan, the Democratic primary, is a city like Dearborn which has a huge Arab and Muslim American population. There's a lot of anger. They're kind of inflamed, if you will, because I believe the Biden administration is too close to Netanyahu in Israel. So Vice President Harris has to do something. She has to go to Michigan, go to Dearborn to try to say, I'm going to relay the concerns to President Biden, and to say that I really want to have a ceasefire. Do not vote for Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. And so that's kind of the case that I would make. And I think that you really have to make sure that you monopolize every solitary vote you can in Michigan, and the Arab American community is very important in that respect. In terms of Donald Trump, I would say I would use his support for the Border Control Union, but also I would say that the Teamsters and the firefighters, I would really take advantage of the fact that they are not supporting Vice President Harris, because they really, in terms of a ground game, when you have the firefighters out, for example, with John Kerry in the primary in 2004, he won the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary in part because he had those firefighters so vociferous. And they do the kind of the legwork, they do kind of the political spade work, they do what's really the ground game of American politics, which is very important. And then at the end of the day, and this is what former Governor Mike Dukakis always says, it always comes down to one thing in election. It's how many doors you can ring, how much shoe leather kind of old-fashioned campaigning one candidate can do. As much as we use technology, as much as we use analytics, as much as we use anything else, it still at the end of the day comes to shoe leather campaigning, coming to make sure that everybody in your political base is galvanized and comes out, and to make sure that you're able to, anybody that you can potentially persuade, particularly if they live in a place like Pennsylvania or North Carolina or Nevada, anybody you can potentially persuade to come to your side is somebody that's coming to your side and not going to yours, so not going to the opponent's side. So you kind of cancel out a vote for the opponent. But bottom line, it's going to be an extremely close election. I really can't envisage a scenario where, at least in the popular vote, where it's going to be a landslide by any candidate, but I could be wrong.
Rich Rubino, always a pleasure, political analyst and historian. Thank you so much for this detailed breakdown as we are just 3 weeks away until Election Day. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.